Hey, what's going on everyone? It's me, Mr. Mario, and in this video here, we're going to be taking a look at one of our old friends here. If you can see it back there, the original Xbox, and a new mod coming out for it, or out already at this point, called the Xbox HDMI. Now, what exactly is Xbox HDMI? Well, this year, Make Megahertz ended up coming out and announcing and also releasing the Xbox HDMI, which bills itself as, quote, the first and only purely digital video output mod for the original Xbox, unquote, which at the time of recording this is still accurate to say. The Xbox HDMI modification itself is a no-cut solution for the Xbox, which allows you to tap directly into the Xbox console and pull a clean digital signal for HDMI output, much like what we've seen in previous consoles such as the DC Digital for Dreamcast or even the PS1 Digital for the original PlayStation. Although do keep in mind the Xbox HDMI is not from the same lineup as the digital series that I've mentioned. I'm just more using that as a comparison here. The Xbox HDMI also advertises itself as a pixel-perfect digital video adapter, as well as having the ability to pass through Dolby Digital 5.1 surround sound all through a single HDMI port. And while all of this is super exciting, it does beg the question, is this worth the money? Is this worth the $80 price tag? Well, if you're checking out this review, I hope that this will answer your question by the end of it. I do have to give a big disclaimer and also a thank you for transparency's sake over to Dustin from Make Megahertz, who actually ended up sending one of these over. This is the exact console I've been messing with. This is an original Xbox console, which if you can see back here, has the Xbox HDMI mod already pre-installed. He had sent this over here for free for review purposes. That was all already done up, so I was able to pretty much hit the ground running after adding a few games that I wanted to play myself. Now, on here, I do also have to say that this is not a sponsored video. This was provided for free for review, and I'm just keeping it real with you all. All the opinions I'm going to express on here are my own. I have not been paid to do this. This is not sponsored. Let's just get that out of the way. But I do want to extend a big thank you to him for not only sending this over, but letting me try this out so early in advance. Now, I also won't be showcasing an installation of this because, as I said, mine was already pre-installed. However, on the Make Megahertz site, there is going to be documentation showing how to install this, as well as a video walkthrough. It's really not a tutorial, as he says. It's supposed to be a walkthrough, but it's more just a visual component that is supposed to complement the written component of this installation. It's also worth noting that all of the gameplay that I'm going to be showing on here has only been upscaled, and that is just to fit the screen. That's about it. What you're seeing is what you're getting. I haven't done any post-processing on it. I'm not going to be doing any sort of color correction on there. Everything that has just been recorded has been put into my editor. I set it to scale, and that's about it on there. So you're just going to get directly what you are supposed to see, and I'm doing that for accuracy, just so you all know what to expect if you are going to be getting this and playing some games on it. However, I will say before you get further into the video, please double check your video playback settings and make sure you're watching this video in either 720p 60 or 1080p 60. That way you can view this in the most accurate way possible. So getting into this here, this does beg the question, why use the original Xbox? Why mess with this big, chunky, really heavy system right here? Why mess with it specifically? Well, there's still a lot of great games to be had on the original Xbox, not only to discover for the first time if you are going back to the system and you might have missed them, or if you've never owned an original Xbox, or if you just want to rediscover some of your favorite games that you might have forgotten about. There's plenty of reasons to go back. I know some people might be saying, well, why don't you just use emulation or something else on there? The original Xbox, in my opinion, is probably the best future-proofed and forward-thinking console of the 6th generation. It has onboard Ethernet, it has a built-in hard drive, it can display HD beautifully, 1080i, even though I wouldn't really recommend that, and 720p, really 720p looks astounding on there, but even standard definition at 480p looks incredibly good. And the most important thing is, since we're talking about, future-proofing and looking into that, these games look incredible. Most of them look incredible, I will say, on a modern display. So if you're playing on a newer monitor or a newer TV especially, they look great. What I'm saying here is the original Xbox still looks phenomenal as long as you take its limitations into effect here and you think about that. And it still continues to impress me, even when I go back to revisit it, especially for this video here. Now, when it comes to emulation, because people might be saying, well, as opposed to digging up one of these systems, why not just emulate it? We have a few options. First of all, you can go the PC route, but there's still a lot that needs to mature on there, so you're not going to have the best experience on there. If you want to go a more official route, you can also go with the Xbox 360. As long as you have a hard drive and the backwards compatibility files on there through an update, you can play about half of the North American Xbox library on the 360. However, that is, again, going to be running on emulation. So there are games that run pretty well, but there's also going to be games that are going to experience issues, glitches, and slowdown. I personally remember that, playing Max Payne on the Xbox 360 using my Xbox disc back in the day. So it's not going to be perfect. Plus, as I said, I mean, glass half full, about half of the North American games work, but glass half empty, about half of the North American games do not work on there. I mean, some people might also be saying, well, you could just modify the Xbox 360 and then put the modified backwards compatibility files on there, and boom, you're done, you can play every single Xbox game, and that is not true. There are going to be games that will run well, there's going to be a lot of games that will have issues, and there's still going to be games that won't boot up at all, so there's no one-size-fits-all to this. And the last option here, which I don't have easily accessible, is the Xbox One. Now, the Xbox One has a select few amount of original Xbox games that run phenomenally and look great on the Xbox One when you end up, putting in all the extra features and all that stuff, or not really features, but they just look a lot better and they play real nice on there is what I'm trying to say. The downside to that is there's not that many games that are going to run on the Xbox One from the original Xbox. A while ago, it was publicly stated that adding more games to the Xbox One's backwards compatibility for the original Xbox is going to be put on hold because they want to shift all their resources to developing the Xbox Series S and Series X. So since those consoles are right around the corner, I am hoping that here sooner rather than later, we will see more games added to the Xbox compatibility list for the Xbox One, the Series S, the Series X. But we're never going to get all of them. I don't even think we're going to get anywhere close to what we see on the Xbox 360, so unfortunately you really can't bank on that either. The few games that work on there work really well, but there's not going to be that many. All of this here is to say, and let's just all agree to this here if we can, the best way to play original Xbox games in terms of compatibility and accuracy is on an original Xbox. Who would have thought? Now that we got all that out of the way, we can kind of get to some level of agreement on the original Xbox. Let's talk about the features that the Xbox HDMI has to offer. Now, I've already talked about the pixel perfect video, and I've also talked about the audio on there as well too, which is all great. And one question people might be asking is, does this work on my Xbox, specifically the 1.6 model? And I am here to say that yes, this does work on every single model of the original Xbox. When you're going to order, just go in and make sure that you select the 1.6 option when you're trying to pick your Xbox revision when purchasing, and you will of course need to make sure you are ordering the right version for your specific console that you want to install it in. Now, I will also mention that the Xbox I've been testing, which has been provided, is a 1.4 system, and some people might also be wondering, well, what about the weird issues that the 1.6 has to offer? For anyone that does not know, the 1.6 Xbox is pretty much the Xbox that doesn't have full compatibility. And what I mean by that is every single Xbox game will play on a 1.6 revision. However, if you are using component cables and you're using those progressive scan options on there, not all games will display at 480p. Some of the games, there's a handful of them that aren't going to display at 480p, and about half of them you can patch to work, but the other ones just don't work properly on there. So the fix for that is really to disable 480p and play those at 480i. Not the best fix, unfortunately. Now, I haven't tested this personally, but I've spoken with Dustin from Make Megahertz, and he has said that once you install a Xbox HDMI adapter in a 1.6 Xbox, this is no longer an issue. That's pretty cool. That's awesome. So maybe for the first time, every single Xbox game on a 1.6 model Xbox can actually play at minimum 480p. Now, it's also been mentioned that this is a no-cut mod, and that is, I mean, directly as the name implies. As you can see right here, it looks really nice just installed, but it does remove the original AV port. However, there's no other destructive method that's going on here unless you want to get destructive with your install. What I mean by that is you don't have to cut out any other holes inside of the case itself. Everything is going to work just fine, and it's really not a required destructive install is what I should be saying. Now, keep this in mind as well too. Yes, this does replace the AV port, which personally I don't mind. So I can only use HDMI on this system. However, many people might want to retain that AV port for whatever reason. I can only speak on the Xbox HDMI, but from what I know, there is going to be an option later down the road where you could just add in the Xbox HDMI. So you end up installing it and you have HDMI and the original AV port. I have no doubts that that method will require you to do some kind of modifications to your case to actually physically install an HDMI port on there, but right now the initial revision of this, no, you remove the old AV port, you put in this new one, it's, drag and drop in there, but not really, it requires soldering. Point is, what I'm trying to say, this is truly a no-cut mod, and it is reversible. So if you also have these skills and the know-how, and you install this, but then you want to remove it and revert it and put the AV port back in, for whatever reason, you can do that as well too. There's nothing you have to cut in your case, there's no traces you have to cut on your motherboard, you just have to be a bit handy with the soldering iron. There's also a really cool Xbox HDMI homebrew application, and this allows you to modify and tweak a few things. This does have a screen testing option. It has many different settings that you can modify in terms of colors, aspect ratio, and such, as well as an option to upgrade the firmware on the Xbox HDMI adapter itself. Unfortunately, I won't be able to show you all how to upgrade the firmware because I don't have a firmware upgrade file on hand, but in the future I am planning to have a video showcasing how to update the firmware on this, so be on the lookout for that if you're at all interested in that process. So let's talk about video settings on here. First of all, you might be noticing that the footage here is captured in 16:9, and that's personally how I play on here, that's how it was displayed, and that's just my own preference. Now, by default as well too, it is worth mentioning that the Xbox HDMI has an option for auto anamorphic widescreen, which is designed to properly stretch out 16:9 480p content. That means that your widescreen 480p games will just show up as widescreen on your TV, and you have no need to mess around with any further options on there, such as zooming or even aspect ratio on your TV. Now, for anybody who does require more content control over how everything is displayed, you can go in and you can disable this in the settings if you wish to. I kept it by default on, and it is by default enabled, but if you want to disable it, that's completely up to you. I do also want to mention, for anybody who is going to be using this to capture gameplay footage, or you intend to, if you have this available in your capture card, you want to make sure you set your RGB color settings to limited as opposed to full range. I say that because it might be a little counterintuitive, where of course you want the full color range on your capture card when you're capturing all this, but you have to keep in mind that full color range was not a thing on the original Xbox here. Yes, you can set this to full color range, and it might look better in some ways. For example, if you're playing a dark game, things are going to look brighter, and if you prefer a brighter look, more power to you, but it's also not going to be as accurate. So while as you might get some settings and some colors that look brighter, you're also going to ruin some other colors as well too, most notably dark black colors. So for example, if you're looking at something that is black, it's going to appear as really, really, really dark gray, as opposed to just a rich black color. So that's just my standard to you all. If you're just displaying this, looking at it on a TV, it should be fine. But if you're capturing gameplay, you want to make sure you're setting this to a limited color space. Now let's talk about resolutions, specifically 480p, forcing 480p, and the enemy of 480p, 480i. Or I guess the enemy to Xbox HDMI here. So in short, you do not want to use 480i resolution on this system here. You don't really want to go with 1080i either. The two you really want to stick to are 480p and 720p, but I digress. I'm going to stick to 480i, just in this discussion for the most part. Now, 480i will work if you're using composite, for example, that's going to be utilizing that, or if you just need to access 480i resolution for whatever reason, sure, you can keep that in place. However, since we're, I don't know, removing the port entirely for AV, and we're only going to be using HDMI, those options are kind of irrelevant at this point. So just trust me on here. You really don't need to be displaying at 480i. Just stick to 480p and higher. That's really what you want to do. The disappointing thing as well too with 480i, if you're so insistent on keeping it, is if you're looking at it on a modern display, such as a monitor or a nice flat screen TV of some kind, 480i does not look good on there. Yeah, it looked fine on older TVs like CRTs and older CRT monitors and such, but it's not going to look good on a modern display. Unless you do something else like you run it through a deinterlacer such as a FrameMeister, but I'm sure most people are not going to do that, nor do they want to do that. And that's another thing we need to talk about with the Xbox HDMI and its limitations. It does not have a deinterlacing option, it's not going to have a scanline option, at least in this current iteration here, and there's no upscaling capability on this. So it's really just taking the signal and it's putting it out. That's all it's doing. So most TVs don't handle 480i properly as well too, is another thing I need to stress on here. So it just does not look the best. So this begs the question, if 480i is such an issue, how do you resolve it? Well, that's simple. Thankfully, some really awesome people in the original Xbox modding community were able to resolve this through the BIOS by releasing 480p forced BIOS, or force 480p BIOS is what they are called. And that just, kind of implies what the title means on there. You're taking a custom BIOS file and you're just forcing 480p. Now, that's not to mean that 720p and 1080i and other resolutions can't be accessed. What this means is 480i is no longer accessible and no longer displayed. And again, on another Xbox that does not have internal HDMI modifications, this might be a little bit of an issue if you ever need to access 480i, but if you have Xbox HDMI installed on there, you really don't need to touch 480i ever. So what I would recommend, and what Dustin from Make Megahertz recommends as well too, is use a force 480p BIOS and actually force out 480p to get rid of 480i from this equation. And that brings up another thing with Xbox modding here. And of course, when we're talking about the original Xbox, it's kind of hard to avoid this. But I don't at all recommend installing this on a console which has not been hard modded. And by that, I mean a console that is running a custom BIOS. So if you want to install this in a stock Xbox that has never been modified, sure, it's possible, you certainly can. If you want to install it in a soft modded system, yeah, you can as well too. But you're really going to get the full control, which is also going to benefit and piggyback off of the Xbox HDMI adapter when you install a custom BIOS. So that is what I would recommend going with on there. Now, there's two ways that you can install a custom BIOS. One of them being a TSOT flash if you install it on any system prior to a 1.6 revision, and the second one being by installing a mod chip. Now, either way you go, you'll be able to hopefully successfully install and run a custom BIOS, but I will go with Make Megahertz here and say that they do not recommend going with only a TSOT flash. Reason being is that, well, it's a lot harder to, resolve yourself out of an error if you run into some kind of issue flashing your onboard TSOP. So they only recommend installing a mod chip in there. And this also begs the question, which mod chip should I go with? And my answer to that would be the Open Xenium mod chip. I've been using it for a bit since I got a few to review. I've actually been using them in one of my systems here, and I love the Open Xenium mod chip. I think it is a fantastic chip. It's pretty affordable for how it is as well too, and I have no issue recommending this. Some people also might not want to install this or might not want to add more things, and I guess I'll ask why on there. Because I will say that installing the Xbox HDMI mod will be harder than installing a mod chip, and if you're going to be installing this mod on there, in my opinion, you might as well just spend a few more dollars and go the extra mile and install a mod chip as well, or at minimum, do a TSOP flash, and at that point you should be all good to go. But both of those are available on the Make Megahertz site. By both, I mean, this adapter as well as the Open Xenium mod chip, if you're going to install them yourself. So going back to Force 480p, as I said, in short, it gets rid of 480i, anything that is supposed to display at 480i, it ends up bumping up to 480p, and you never have to worry about that low resolution, again, that interlaced resolution. And in my opinion, this will greatly enhance the Xbox HDMI experience, so this is something that you definitely want to do, and is only going to be possible through a custom BIOS with, again, a mod chip or a TSOP flash. Now, I can talk about this a lot, and I have, mind you, but let's go ahead and show an example of this. So on screen, I'm going to be showing the game Manhunt, which is a really gritty, dark, and kind of disturbing game, but mind you, it's going to work well enough for our example. This here is a game that only displays at 480i, so for this I end up grabbing another Xbox I have with a Chimeric Systems adapter. This is an external HDMI adapter, and in my opinion, the best one that you can get on the market right now. And I do want to say this as well too, any faults that you see here in the footage are not because of the adapter, but just to keep it even, here is the Unleash X dashboard running at 720p using the Chimeric adapter, and now here is the same dashboard running at 720p on the Xbox HDMI. Now let's take a look at Manhunt being forced to 480p over the Xbox HDMI. This looks pretty great, right? I will also say too, for both these comparisons, I did go into the settings on Manhunt, and I disabled the noise effects that the game has. That is not any sort of modification, that is a setting that you can tweak in the game itself, and I just wanted to clean this up as best as I could. Now let's go back and look at Manhunt displaying normally at 480i using the external HDMI adapter. And you're going to see this looks awful in comparison. I was shocked at how much of a downgrade it was, but really what you're seeing here is what you get. I haven't modified the footage, I haven't deinterlaced it, I haven't done anything else, and I really do want to stress that this right here is not an adapter fault. And this here is exactly why you want to go with a 480p BIOS. No more do you have to worry about individual titles or patching up your game or what have you. You just fire up your game and you go. That's about the end of it. Now let's be honest with ourselves. We're not going to go all out of our way to get an original Xbox, modify it with the Xbox HDMI, just to talk about resolutions and settings all day. We're here to play some games. And don't worry, I did plenty of that. So here's a few highlights that I wanted to go over here. There might be a lot, but mind you, I've been messing around with this quite a bit.
Mary, could you really be in this town?
What a beautiful nightmare that we can put into this on a Halloween release video for 2020. Silent Hill 2 is one of my all-time favorite games, and I figured a perfect game to showcase in this video. It's truly terrifying, and of course, it is even more terrifying when you show it over the Xbox HDMI.
Is it dead? What the hell is it?
You know what? If I made this video without showing any Jet Set Radio footage or talking about it, I know people would have been very upset. Jet Set Radio Future is an absolute masterpiece of an exclusive for the original Xbox. I love everything about it. The gameplay, the music, the characters, the settings, and of course, I mean, the style and color. Just look at it here. Come on, I couldn't do this without showing this game.
Why is it so hard for you to catch a few little punks? Hurry up and arrest them! There, you little punk! Don't lose that kid!
Burnout 3, I believe I got this as a recommendation a few times on Twitter, and I gotta say, this game looks great, it plays real well. Yes, this isn't really all about the gameplay, it's how this is looking right here, but I was pretty impressed with it. It holds up. Oh, and the soundtrack is awesome. It's really great.
Oh, didn't look too good tonight. Ooh, hang on a sec. Sorry about that, old chap. Gotta go.
Conquer Live and Reloaded is one of my personal favorites, so of course I had to fire it up. This game is still absolutely hilarious, and it looks as disgusting as it needs to. I mean, dung beetles, singing poop, vomit, and all. This is a good way to demonstrate the Xbox HDMI, right?
Eat that, mother butter.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Squirrel. And none of this would have happened if it weren't for that no good husband of mine. He's gone off, you know, with another woman.
Oh, really? That doesn't surprise me.
What? Nothing.
Ah, Hunter the Reckoning. This is one of my absolute favorite titles, and I'm so happy that I got to revisit it here. I actually got to play this with a friend in co-op for the first time a few years ago, because when I was really getting into Xbox modding, I decided to take over a system at his house. We tried it out, and even just using some cheap component cables because I didn't know any better, he was impressed with how clean it looked. So even now, I mean, take a look at it here. It cleans up really well, and I mean, it's great. It's clean, it's hellish, but it's still fun.
try to help you, and this is the thanks I get. You think I can't see you shaking at the other end of that barrel? Do you think I don't know that your brain is trying to process the horrible fact that, oh my god, it talks, and if it talks, it thinks?
Dead or Alive 3, again, one of my personal favorites, and this is a launch title. Like, just let that sink in. Yeah, I will say the aliasing that you're seeing on here leaves a bit to be desired, and I feel like even I could forgive that just because it's a launch title, but my goodness does this game look incredible. It's one of the most impressive titles I've seen on the original Xbox while getting to do this review, and even more so with it, again, being a launch title. I can't stress this enough.
この俺の務め。
でも
聞け、あやね。
これは身内の問題。颯様といえどもこの役譲るわけに。お察しください。Get ready, fire!
I did want to make sure I showed Halo here, and I wanted to clear up something. Now, first of all, this game looks great at 480p, mind you, but some people might be looking at that Meg Megahertz site and thinking, damn, Halo looks that good at 720p? Well, yes, it does once you patch it. The game natively runs at 480p, and there is a homemade patch that you can run to play the game at 720p. However, it's not really the best. I've been showing you the footage at 480p, and now here's the footage at 720p. And as you can see, you're getting a rock solid 10 to 20 frames per second. No, it's not even rock solid. It's super unstable. It's all over the place. This looks great for screenshots, mind you, and I definitely know that's what it was used for on here. But this is best to not play it at 720p. Just play it at 480p. For the purposes of Xbox HDMI, I totally get why they did take screenshots of this, because it looks beautiful and it does hold up, I believe, but you don't want to be playing it at 720p.
Alert! Covenant dropship inbound. They must be looking for survivors. I recommend immediate evasion. I've detected multiple Covenant dropships on approach. I recommend moving into those hills. If we're lucky, the Covenant will believe that everyone aboard this lifeboat died in the crash. Alert! Covenant dropship inbound. They must be looking for survivors. I recommend immediate evasion.
Halo 2. I mean, come on, it's Halo 2. Like, do I need to say any more? Alright, I gotta admit this. I don't really like Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 4. Like, this might be, out of, the best ones at the beginning, it's probably my least favorite. However, the big benefit this game does have is that it runs at 720p natively. So we're tossing some footage in here. It looks good, I don't like the game that much, I'll be honest. Outrun 2. Yet another game that I got a few requests on. I don't think I really could get away without showing it on here. It pops, it looks great, you gotta love it, it's super fun.
Checkpoint.
Get out of my way!
What the?
Watch where you're going, you punk!
That goes for you too, barging into people like that.
You must be Japanese.
Yes.
Watch out! Here in Hong Kong, you can easily get run over.
Shenmue 2 is yet again another viewer request that I got, and for this playthrough, well, it's not really a playthrough. I didn't really get too far in, just enough to kind of check it out and see how it is on here. You know, it's a bit of a janky game, admittedly, so in some places it doesn't hold up well, but in other places it still looks pretty impressive. Plus, I mean, it's Shenmue 2, you gotta give some respect to the series here, and my respect is putting it in this review. Crimson Skies here. My goodness, this game looks absolutely incredible. Just take a look at it here.
Just because you got a set of wings doesn't mean you can fly.
Oh, thanks, Nathan.
What was that all about?
You know about Soul Edge. Phantom, what do you want of me? You answer me. Battle 1, fight!
Oh, now here we go. Soul Calibur 2 was absolutely jaw-dropping to me when I had seen it on here because I had never seen this game in HD, and I'm so happy I took this viewer recommendation. Now keep in mind, this is, yes, it is being displayed in letterbox, but I'm not squishing it back down. That is one odd thing about this game. From what I know, at 480p, it plays in widescreen if you choose to do that, but at 720p, it does force it into letterbox. I can only assume that is to save on some system resources, but my goodness, just look at it here. It looks absolutely incredible, and in my opinion, this might be one of the most impressive releases on here, if not the most impressive thing I've seen come out of this.
Final battle, fight!
The original Project Gotham Racing was actually a viewer recommendation I got pretty early on when I got the Xbox HDMI. Just like Dead or Alive 3, it's not only quite impressive, but it's a launch title as well too. Now, I've never been a huge fan of the original Project Gotham Racing, more so because I was awful at it, and I'm still awful at it, so some things don't change. I mean, just look, it looks absolutely astounding. I even tried out Project Gotham Racing 2 for a bit, and I don't think that one looked as good, in my opinion. It just looked a little too washed out, but the first one looks great on here. Yet again, this is absolutely impressive for the original Xbox, and especially something that launched on it. Panzer Dragoon Orta, another great exclusive which I absolutely love how it looks on here. Real fun game, definitely took the opportunity to hop back in and play it. Hidden inside of Panzer Dragoon Orta is actually a fully playable build of Panzer Dragoon. I mean, it's not really hidden, you have to unlock it, but still. It's a worthwhile port, maybe not something that has aged super well coming all the way from the Sega Saturn, but here it is, it's playable on the Xbox and it's definitely playable through this route. So let's go ahead and talk final thoughts on here. I know this was a really long review, but I did have a lot that I wanted to cover and a lot that I wanted to show you all as well too over something just like this. I was trying to find any sort of faults or anything that I could poke in here. Honestly, I can't. This thing is awesome. This is a great adapter, this is a great modification, and this is actually how I'm going to be using my own Xbox going forward. Back there, that is my main Xbox that I use to just chill out and play on and such, and once this is all over and done with, I'm going to be taking, like, the case there, my cool little Halo case, I'm going to be taking the motherboard and stuff out of there, and I'm going to be case swapping it with the console that has been modified in here, in the motherboard, because that is how I want to use my system from now on, with the Xbox HDMI. Like, this is going to be my main system, my go-to. There is one fault I can think of, and I even struggle to call it a fault, because it seems so much like an issue only I was dealing with on here, so I'm more sharing this for not only transparency, but maybe if anybody gets a hold of an Xbox HDMI adapter and they experience the same issue, maybe me sharing this can help you all out a little bit. So I have two main capture cards I use. I have a Game Capture HD60, and as a backup I have a Game Capture HD. And I noticed for some reason when I went over and I hooked up the Xbox HDMI modified system, it would not display on my monitor. It would not pick up anything on my software. It would not pick up anything at all. I couldn't get it to display. If I hooked it up directly to the monitor, it was fine. If I hooked it up to any other TV, it was fine. What I'm saying is this is the only system that I had this issue with. And I just want to say also a big shout out to Dustin from Make Megahertz. I was in contact with him the whole time. I told him about this issue. He tried to help me out. He tried to show me how to update the firmware on them, which I did. I tried different HDMI cables. I tried different USB cables. I even tried a whole different computer. Not only I used my desktop here, but I also used my laptop, and I was able to replicate the issue on there, and I couldn't get past it. He even went so far out of his way to not only check with someone who had an Xbox HDMI modified system and with the same capture card, they couldn't replicate the issue, but he even went and bought the capture cards that I was using and tried them out. So big ups to him on that, but he also kind of wasted his money because he couldn't replicate the issue either. So this is something that I can replicate on command at any given time, and for some reason, no one else can. I don't know. I do have another few capture cards. I do have a Cam Link, which I'm currently using for this footage, and I also have this thing called the Can't Link, which is just like a nice little bootleg capture card here. I guess Epos Vox has reviewed this quite a bit and spoken on it. But either way, I've tried the both of these, and they've worked fine. So 2 of my 4 capture cards, the ones that I actually want to use with this, don't seem to work with this properly for whatever reason. And I can't tell you why. I do have a little bit of a bypass though. So I have one of these things called a M cable, and essentially this is supposed to, you hook it up and you're supposed to be able to clean up signals and all that. A lot has been talked about with this, or actually this isn't even the cable, this is called the M Classic, and I can only theorize at this point, but for whatever reason, this bypass worked. I took the end of the M Classic and I hooked it up to the Xbox. Then I took the HDMI cable going from my capture card and hooked it up to the end of the M Classic. And then I powered it up. And at that point, my only theory is I was able to provide enough power that was lacking somewhere in the chain that I was then able to display everything on my monitor and I was able to capture footage. Now, some people might be looking at this and saying, oh my god, you manipulated the image. I didn't. There are options on here. There is, the actual like on cleanup option. There's a retro mode, and then there's off, which is only for pass-through. And I made sure this was off the entire time. So all the footage you have seen already that was captured through this Xbox has not been modified. I was only using this as a pass-through, but this is the only way I have found to bypass this. I mean, I even use, I have a cheap, HDMI SCART to HDMI adapter, which typically I'll rely on in case I'm having some weird issues, and I hooked it up to that, and I still couldn't get a display. So, I don't know what's going on here. All I can recommend is if anybody else has this issue, make sure you document it and report it to Make Megahertz, and maybe it can be resolved through a firmware update, because none of them are able to replicate it. I certainly can, but I'm, one person out of I don't know how many people who got it early and got to test it a bit. So there's not a very large sample size is what I'm trying to say. So let's talk about the money here as well too. At $80 US, before any type of shipping and handling and what have you, is this worth the money? Well, let's also talk about some other options here before we really get to that. First of all, we could just go with what Xbox has provided, well, Microsoft specifically, which is component cables. You can go with a component pack, you can go with some component cables, like some cheap ones or some DIY ones, and variations on that can be anywhere from awful to pretty damn good. However, you are going to run into an issue, which is a lot of displays, especially computer monitors, don't have component hookups on there. You could resolve this a bit by getting really good component cables or again doing some nice DIY ones, but that doesn't resolve the issue of things being more modern and a lot of newer displays and TVs and especially monitors, as I said, not having an option for component. I'm actually suffering from that as well too, where my main TV that I use, beautiful TV, beautiful signal, beautiful screen, absolutely love it, but I don't have components on there. So I have to, if I want to use component, I have to use my FrameMeister or use something else, such as an HDMI adapter. Now, HDMI adapters have gotten pretty popular, and there's a few that you can go with. First of all, you could go with a cheaper $20 or $30 option, such as a pound HDMI cable. This goes from the back of the Xbox to an HDMI cable, which you hook up to your monitor or your TV. The thing is with these, they do get a lot of hate. I will say my experience with them, for the most part, has actually been pretty good. I know that they have their issues. I know that they're not the most accurate, but for the most part, I'm able to hook this up and the signal looks pretty good. Maybe a little bit too dark for my liking, but it's fine enough for the most part. The downside of this is these are so hit and miss. Not only just these pound ones, I'm not just ragging on them, but a lot of other cheaper $20 or $30 adapters as well too. Some of the issues you're going to run into are quality might not be all that good, color accuracy might not be the best, white balance might be off, or you might just have something where, for example, I have a system where if I hook up these, and I've tried like 2 or 3 of these pound cables on this one system, for whatever reason, I can't figure it out. It's just the curse of the 1.4 Xbox. I don't know, because this is known. But the signal will just constantly cut in and out to the point where I can't use it and it's completely unplayable. So I can't use that with that system with any of these cables, and you might run into the same thing. You also might get wavy lines as well too, but the point is I've had good experiences with these, and I've also had very bad experiences with them. Now, if you want to spend a little more money, the only cable that I would really recommend for the most part would be the Chimeric Systems Xbox adapter here. These are about $50 or $55, so they are cheaper than the Xbox HDMI, and they are external, so you can use them across different systems. You don't have to open up, you don't have to modify anything, so it seems to be pretty great. This is the only one I would use, and it's certainly a great option. However, it is also accurate to say that you are going to get more options, more abilities, and just more freedom, I would say, so to speak, with really tweaking what you want to using an onboard device such as the Xbox HDMI. Nothing against this right here, I'm just pointing out something that is factual. Last but not least, you also have the upcoming Xbox HDMI solution, not this one here, the one that will be coming from Citrus 3000, the person who is the author and creator of the DC Digital as well as the PS1 Digital. Both, from what I've seen, are absolutely phenomenal devices. I know that he has one coming in there. I don't have any insider information on it. I'm not in personal contact with him, and this video is not about that device. But that one is coming out as well too, and this is just kind of educated guessing right here. I'll just say for this sake, it's called the Xbox Digital. If we're going to compare his Xbox Digital solution to the Make Megahertz Xbox HDMI, his is probably going to have upscaling of some kind. It will most likely, actually I know it will have a Wi-Fi board. It will probably have an option to allow you to just add it into the Xbox, so you don't have to remove the AV port. You can have the HDMI port and the AV port, and it will probably have some other nice bells and whistles as well too, such as scan lines that are on there. The downside is it's probably also going to cost you more money. So with all of that out of the way, all those options there, those I would say are very good modern options for displaying your original Xbox on a nice TV. Can I recommend the Xbox HDMI for Make Megahertz? Is it worth the money? Yeah, it is. I've been using this thing for almost 2 months in the background here, and I believe this is an absolutely phenomenal solution for the original Xbox. I personally have no issues recommending this, but when it comes to your situation and what you want to do, the final stretch and the decision is going to be in your hands. Do you want to only be limited to one system, such as like with the Xbox HDMI? Or do you want to move this between different systems, such as using the Chimeric Systems HDMI adapter? Do you possess the necessary soldering skills to install this? Or will you be paying an installer for their services? Are you going to be looking towards this? Or do you want to wait for the Citrus 3000 release and then maybe compare the two internal HDMI devices and see if that one's going to be worth it as opposed to Xbox HDMI? At this point, I can't even speak on that one because we just know that it exists, but we don't really have much other information on there, specifically price. We really don't have that on hand. The final decision is up to you, but if put in my shoes, if I paid $80 for this and I did the installation myself, so therefore I'm cutting out any kind of middleman there with having to ship it off, pay for a service, pay for shipping it back, yeah, I would be quite happy with the final result. So that's about all I have for this here. Thank you all for watching. I hope you all very much enjoyed this here, just as much as I enjoyed reviewing this and going back to play a bunch of original Xbox games. Again, I want to extend a huge thank you to Dustin over from Make Megahertz for sending out this pre-modified console and for letting me take a look at this so far in advance. It's really been a joy getting to review a piece of hardware like this, and I've had a lot of fun doing it. So yeah, anyways, let me know of your thoughts on Xbox HDMI. Do you like it? Do you hate it? Do you think it's not worth it? Do you think this might be something you get? Are you going to wait on it? Are you going to get it immediately? Who knows? But that's why I'm asking you all. Anyways, this is Mr. Mario signing off. Thank you all for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, a like would absolutely be appreciated, and if you didn't like it, a dislike is fine as well too.